Hi everyone, I'm Kyle Dyer and welcome to Colorado Inside Out on this Friday, April the 19th. Just about 2.5 weeks are left in the 2024 Colorado legislative session, and this weekend will be a noteworthy one here in our state. To talk about all that is happening in Colorado, let me introduce you to our panel. We have Patty Calhoun, founder and editor of Westword, Krista Kafer, columnist for the Denver Post, Eric Sonderman, columnist for Colorado Politics and the Colorado Springs and Denver Gazettes, and also Alton Dillard, media consultant and political analyst and former elections spokesperson for the city and county of Denver. Thank you all for joining us this week. Tomorrow marks the 25th year since the shooting at Columbine High School, when 2 students armed with assault rifles and other firearms killed 12 students and 1 teacher. 23 others were injured. Just last weekend, in a special Sunday gathering at the state capitol, the House approved legislation that would ban the sale of so-called assault weapons in Colorado. And also, members of our congressional delegation this week spoke out about gun violence. Patty, let's start with you.
And in fact, there's a vigil right now as this show is on at the Capitol with more people talking about gun violence. So 25 years ago, it was so horrifying, it was beyond belief, because there had been other school shootings, but nothing that hit really the country the same way Columbine hit. 2 white kids from an affluent suburb of Colorado with the name Columbine for the school. There were warning signs. There were plenty. The Harris family, for sure, could have known what was going on. The Jefferson County Sheriff's Office had been warned about it, and they didn't pay attention. So there have been some changes made. We have the Safe to Tell warning sign now. We have law enforcement now learned the lesson of Columbine, which is you go in immediately. And we've seen how it works. They didn't do it at Uvalde. You saw what happened. But people would be saved. But the lessons we are still not getting is, what do you do about the guns? In 2000, Ken Gordon, then a legislator, snuck a gun into the Capitol just to show how easy it was to do. And we still have legislators leaving their guns in the bathroom in the Capitol.
Last week, yep. Krista.
So I'm a Columbine graduate, graduated before that harrowing day. The idea of kids killing kids in a large-scale way really wasn't part of the human imagination until that day. So how do you take guns out of the hands of bad people, people who want to do evil things or irresponsible things, parents who leave guns around for their, or even give guns to their messed up teenagers? How do you prevent them from having guns or remove their guns while still allowing ordinary, law-abiding, responsible human beings to own these guns? And I think that's something as a culture, as a society, we're struggling with. I do think that the bill that passed in the House will probably not pass in the Senate because it really does target law-abiding citizens. And I also think it won't pass constitutional muster as well, given the Bruin decision. I think we really need to focus our efforts on how do we get guns away, not from the ordinary law-abiding person, but from those who intend to do ill with that object.
We can talk about legislation, and we should talk about legislation. I've been on record as saying I will support, any reasonable gun control measure that passes legal muster. The problem is most of this, as Krista pointed out, in all likelihood, will not pass legal muster. And so, some of it is just trying to pressure the system as much as you can, and some of it is just signaling where your sympathies are at in our political divide. Policy is a piece of it. Lord knows mental health is a piece of it, but I think the piece of it we don't talk about enough might be connected to mental health, but it's different in my mind, and it's just cultural. It is part of the cultural rot that we are living through in so many segments of our society, and it's not limited by race or class. As Patty pointed out, Columbine's a largely white suburban school. This doesn't know race or class, but it does know evil and it does know cultural rot, and we have not figured it out.
After the needle didn't move after Sandy Hook, I was done. Now it's time to think in terms of criminal control. You can talk gun control all you want, but we have a tendency as a society to not want to say, oh, someone's acting a little off. Somebody is acting out in a way that may be concerning. And we're okay letting that go. Guns are an inanimate object, but the prevalence of them everywhere and even going beyond mass shootings. I know we're going to talk about this a bit coming up in the show. They're everywhere, and you cannot have damaged people, traumatized people, dangerous people in our schools, in our theaters, in our churches, places like that.
All right. Last weekend was a rough one here in the metro area with shootings involving teenagers. Here in Denver, also in Aurora and Lakewood, Littleton has an unsolved murder of an 18-year-old from the week before. There may be others that I'm not referring to, but to be honest, it's really hard to keep up. We all know that there is way too much violence right now involving young adults and teenagers, and that's either as the victims or as the suspects, Krista.
Well, I also want to add to that just suicide. Too many young people lose their lives at their own hands. And I think the interesting thing about being older is I can look back and say, you know, has this happened before? I remember when I was in my late teens, early 20s, the whole Crips and Bloods and gang warfare and shootings were in the news every day. And if you look at the crime stats, crime was actually higher in the 90s, 80s and 90s than it is today. But I also think it's important that we not give in to what I think of as the Fox News syndrome, which is everything is negative and on fire all the time, when it's not. We have a better city than we had back then. We have less violence than we had back then. Let's give the people that need the support they need without thinking that violence is at an all-time high. Because I tell you, there's people out there that would like us to believe that everything is falling apart. Very often, those are the same people running for office.
I don't mean to sensationalize this, but last weekend the headline were that there were these kids, and in one case, a fellow kid was the one who shot somebody he knew, right? I mean...
When there are 4 or 5 shootings in a weekend, I think you have to take it seriously, and you have to make note of it. And let's note that it's only April. It is not the heat of July and August here. It is just the middle of April, and yet that was what this past weekend brought to the metro area. There's a lot of discussion these days about the impact of phones and social media on young people. The summer of violence, the original quote-unquote summer of violence in Denver was, I believe, 1993. That was long before cell phones. It was long before Instagram and TikTok and so all forms of social media. So this does not just emanate from cell phones or new technology. It has been with us for a long while, and it doesn't seem to be getting a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to put on my old hat because this is a consequence of a consequence-free society. I've been hearing the same narratives since 1993. And I also remember when they talked about the summer of violence, there was a certain level of coverage because this is happening in communities of color. And then a white shop owner, Tom Holler, gets killed by a gang member. And then next thing you know, the rest of the city starts getting interested in this particular issue. And so for 30 years, been hearing what we're going to do about it, what we're going to do about it. And I know Patty's going to touch on this also, but there is a summit going on hosted by the Colorado Black Roundtable that will be tomorrow, Saturday, at the Zion Senior Center. And I am hoping, as someone who's been a Denverite for 57 years, that maybe something new will be under the sun.
As Alton pointed out, it wasn't that it was more violent than other summers had been. You just had white shop owners and his wife, Christina Holler, who was brutalized. And I think you had a little baby who was shot too. We did a story 30 years ago about it and said it actually was less violent than the summer before. But it's really important to remember crime is down, but youth violence is way up. And we're talking young kids. We were on this show talking about a 13-year-old who's been accused of shooting a 60-year-old man on a bus just because his leg was out in front of him. And those kinds of things are not isolated incidents. There are younger people using guns, and obviously none of them are getting them legally. And it's ironic because right after we were talking about that shooting on this show, we decided to do a deep dive into youth violence. In a story we ran 2 weeks ago, I think it's a really, really important story. We failed with a very bad cover for it, which I've apologized for and I will continue to, but I recommend you go to John Bailey's event tomorrow, you read the story and you read about the stats. Young violence is really a problem.
There's also a narrative that kids say we have to be armed to get back and forth to our school safely. And if that's the case, that is on us as a society for not getting our arms around our kids.
And you also have to think, these are kids who, so many of their formative years were during COVID. So they are not connected. When you were talking about criminals, we have to figure out what's causing young criminals of all backgrounds. And COVID is definitely part of it.
Yes.
Okay. As I mentioned at the top of the show, we are in the home stretch of the legislative session. There are big issues that still need to be figured out, like the budget and property taxes, and there are debates over bills that continue to show the partisan behavior within our General Assembly. Eric, let's start with you.
That's normal, par for the course in many senses, that the heavy stuff often gets put off to the end. I'm not worried about the budget. I think the JBC did a very credible job. It has some strong members on it this session. And I think ultimately that will pass with only the most minor of changes. I'm surprised that the property tax uproar in this state has not been more than it is. I've talked to so many people. I know my own property tax bills. I've talked to somebody yesterday who struggles considerably on the financial side. And his property taxes went up 55% on a rather small, humble suburban home. That issue needs redress in some way, and we'll see if this session has it in it. And then you have the whole Tabor issue and whether Tabor refunds are going to be forthcoming next year. Whole lot of issues we're going to be talking about around this table for the next few weeks, but the heavy work is still ahead.
Alton.
Yeah, co-signing with Eric, I think this also speaks to our societal attention span. Because remember when property tax, I'm being hit in my wallet, I'm being hit in my pocketbook, front page news. And there's just something about us now where we don't seem to be able to sustain the outrage. So I don't know if it's a matter of, social media or people just worried about their day-to-day, but between some of the heavy lift like he's mentioning as far as property tax, there's some other interesting bills going on up there. Just as a political nerd paying attention to Representative Marshall's resolution, essentially saying that if you came to office via a vacancy committee, you cannot run to be a legislature in the next go-round. So there are a lot of things going on, and this is when the legislature always gets fascinating to me, that last 3.5 weeks, because again, nerdy civics lesson, you can turn something from introduction to the governor's desk in 72 hours. So keep an eye on the dome.
Okay, all right.
Right, we're under 20 days now, and things are wild. Such a combination. Like the Wolverine reintroduction bill is coming through, lemon laws. But what I'm concerned about is there was the bill that maybe there's a change in the statute of limitations for construction defects so that people who are trying to build housing, affordable housing, won't be hit up at all times for construction defect, to kind of rein it in somewhat. But at the same time, what went down on Wednesday was a bill that would extend the statute of limitations for children who are sexually abused. It's currently 6 years. They wanted to extend it beyond that because often only 38% of children reveal that they've been sexually abused, and often it takes a decade to deal with it. And that went down, and that is really a shame. Colorado, they passed a bill in 2021. It needed to be fixed. This fix isn't going to work, but I think we'll see it back next year.
Okay, Krista.
I've been also thinking about that bill that would lengthen the statute of limitations. Wanting justice for those who were molested is super important. And as Patty said, some people who were victims don't come forward till much later because it is so traumatizing. And allowing them then to go after those that victimize them, that justice issue is really important. The other side of that isn't no justice, it's what about justice for those who are innocent. In this sense, we have statute of limitations on these laws because of memory, because of not being able to get witnesses, making sure that claims are brought forth sooner than later is important. And it's an important aspect of our justice system, which says that we have a presumption of innocence. I actually admire both sides in this debate because I think they're wrestling with justice for victims, but also justice for the innocent, people who would go to jail because a very old claim that justice didn't come from that. So I appreciate that they've talked about this, and I hope they do so again.
Okay, all right. So in Colorado, marijuana has been legal for medical use since 2000 and for recreational use since 2012. And tomorrow is the day for cannabis lovers. It is 420 Day. Alton, 10 years ago, Colorado became the first state in the nation to legalize marijuana for recreational use for adults.
Yes.
First one.
Yes. First one. And so I always have to disclose my client relationship with One Chance to Grow Up, which is a community nonprofit that specializes in the space of protecting kids from today's high-octane marijuana products. We're not out there to relitigate Amendment 64 or anything like that. It is the law of the land. We are not anti-industry. We actually worked with the industry to get the 420 event that you mentioned, 21 and up, ID verified. So we want to get that on the table early. And so one of the things that we're concerned about is, again, just the potency of today's products and how today's products appear in the market. Kids' brains are still developing when they're 15, 16, 17, 18 years old. Today's products look like gummy bears. They look like Skittles. And because of the high THC that you're even seeing in additional products, that is one of our concerns. So we talk about what are some of the gaps and regulatory gaps that still need to be filled, but we are not driven by emotion when it comes to these discussions. We are driven by medical data and statistical fact. And so just remember, it's not the ditchweed that we remember.
Okay. Patty.
Speak for yourself, Alton. It's interesting because it's not unlike the discussion of guns, which is there's certain ages that shouldn't have access to guns, and there's certain ages that shouldn't have access to cannabis. So the first sales in Colorado were 10 years ago, this past January. It's been tricky because definitely the sales are leveling off. The amount of collections and taxes that paid for rec centers in Aurora and a new civic building in Edgewater, I mean, it has been a boon for local governments in many ways, and when it's handled right, it's been fine. I mean, you now have more than the majority of Americans live in states where recreational marijuana is now legal. And in even more, of course, medical marijuana is legal. So you just have to be sure things are handled well. Denver and Colorado have some issues, which are, among other things, there's no place socially, really, you can go and consume. So you have tourists coming to town, although the tourism industry is falling off, and there's nowhere they can go. And we've wasted a lot of bureaucratic time on it when, in fact, the time maybe would have been better spent making sure all the regulations work so that kids don't get their hands on it.
Krista?
I would say that Alton does speak for me. I inhaled. 30 years ago, I was one of the people that smoked that ditchweed, and that goes to the fact that there was no need for this in the first place. If you wanted pot, you could get it. Everyone was maybe 1 to 2 people away from a dealer who would sell you a dime bag in a moment. The problem with having it go commercial is there have been a number of problems. Part of it is this high potency weed that we now see. Also, you think about all the great things that we funded. They're funded off of people's bad decisions. I mean, yeah, there are people who smoke here and there, but there are a lot of people who have increased their pot consumption, and very often they're the people who should not be, should be out there looking for work and doing other things. But I just feel that the costs have been far greater than the benefits, and I didn't vote for it then. I know there's no undoing it now, but I wish we could go back in time and do something different.
Well, I was prepared to be the real Debbie Downer at this table, but given I'm surrounded by Krista and Alton, I guess I have some company here. Clearly, marijuana is here to stay. You're not going to unwind Amendment 64. There's no constituency for doing that. The industry is deeply embedded in this state. Many people have gotten wealthy, and a lot of other people haven't gotten wealthy, but they have a paycheck. In terms of whether it has been a boon to the state, the jury is very much still out in my mind from a public health perspective. A whole lot of people out there are not aware of the degree to which this pot is different than the pot all of us grew up with in terms of the potency. And in terms of kids, yeah, we can all agree that should not be a kid's sport. But the fact is, we've given a green light to it in terms of public acceptance. And Colorado kids do use marijuana at a higher rate than their peers in most other states around the country. And there's no getting around that fact. So it is a very mixed verdict in my mind.
What's a shame really is the mom and pop businesses. When you had the medical marijuana people in 2000, very, very sincere in what it could do to help. But there were, of course, some people who used loopholes, and they're mom and pop businesses that started out, and now you have, if not big pharma, you certainly have chains coming in, and that's changed the industry.
Okay, all right. Now it is time for our panel to go through some of the highs and the lows of this week. Let's start with some of the low points, something that really bothered you this week, Patty.
Well, we finally have the primary ballot set for the end of June, but we are just a little over 6 months away from another presidential election, and we have a former president on trial right now in New York, and then next week the Supreme Court will consider whether or not the president has immunity. And it's incredible that we are at this point.
I have to do shame of the month. I'm going to give it to Rebecca Levrenz. She was one of the Colorado people who have been convicted of breaking into the Capitol on January 6th. And she didn't do violence, but she did go into the building and was there and has been convicted, and apparently is very surprised she was convicted. I write about her case in one of my columns because I have deep concerns about Christian nationalism and those people like Levrenz who believe that they were there because God wanted them to be. And I think there's still a strain of that in this country, and I'm concerned about it.
The news just came across that 4 more cows in Grant County have been killed by wolves. So there's that ongoing story. But where I really was going to go is where I often go, Denver Public Schools. And Superintendent Marrero his use of NDAs, non-disclosure agreements for people who are leaving the school district, that is not an appropriate procedure in the public sector. It is not a common one. I think it is of a shape now with what we're seeing throughout Colorado and other realms, which is a decrease in transparency, an increase in secrecy and walling off government from those who it's supposed to serve and who need to be able to know what's going on. It's of a family with that, and shame on DPS and shame on Alex Marrero.
And my shame, of course, most of them are going to be driving related, and I'm going to dovetail off of what Luigi said on the last show. Potholes. Understanding this is Colorado, understanding this is Denver, we have a freeze-thaw cycle. It's 30 outside now, it was 82 days ago. We understand that. But driving in Denver is like driving on the wild chipmunk at Lakeside. So understanding we've got migrants, we've got people experiencing homelessness, we have budgetary concerns. I got all that. Please fix the potholes.
I agreed with Luigi. I agree with you now. Something good.
A weekend with both good and bad observances, but let's remember Monday is Earth Day. We live in a beautiful state. Let's keep it that way.
Right on.
I'm going to say hats off to Denver for trying something new in helping asylees to get their work permits, to get settled. A lot of other cities have simply shipped these people off to another city, and I feel like our city has shown a great humanitarian concern for those who are among us who are fleeing difficult places.
Eric.
There's a transition going on at this station at PBS 12, not in terms of this program or what viewers see on the air, but in terms of the upper echelons of management. Hats off to Kristen Blessman, who has been the president and general manager here for a few years, who is moving on to new pursuits. She has brought a growth mentality to the station. She has also enlisted and enticed some very, very talented people to work with her and beneath her. She's done a great job, and she'll be missed.
Kristen will be missed, and she brought up the idea of we can provide impact media for Colorado, so we'll keep that going.
And mine has to do, we were talking about youth violence earlier, but I want to shout out the people who have been doing the work in the streets, because we have a changing generation now. So we still have folks like Reverend Kelly and folks like Cisco Gallardo who are in town, and people like Dean Askew. But now we have a newer generation really stepping in to do the work. Folks like Troy Grimes, Coach I, people like Dane Washington, Jason McBride, people like that who are a little closer in age to the kids they're trying to serve, and they are out doing the people's work in the streets.
That's awesome. I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you so much. And you all know me, I'm a local sports fan. So my positive is, I'd like to say a way to go to Denver. I can't even say it, Denver, because the DU hockey team has won their 10th hockey championship, more than any other collegiate team. And with that vibe, let's get a repeat with the Nuggets as we take on the Lakers at the beginning of the playoffs this weekend. And same to go with the Avs. We've talked a lot about tough stuff in Denver, but there is a lot of good to get behind in Denver. So thanks to everyone that's doing the good. Thank you, panel, for coming this week. We appreciate it. And thank you all for watching at home or listening to our podcast on Spotify. And last, I just want to close with a show of support and love to those affected by what happened on April 20th of 1999. With this weekend and with this anniversary upon us, know that the Columbine community is never forgotten. I'm Kyle Dyer. I will see you next week here on PBS 12.
PBS 12 believes in the power of original, local programming. Help us bring more shows, like the one you just watched, by donating at pbs12.org/program support today.